Every weekday morning at dawn, the harbor here in New Bedford, Massachusetts, fills with returning fishing boats as skippers bring their catch to auction.
For generations now, the port of New Bedford has been organized around a daily ritual, the moment when all the key players converge and everyone's economic fate is determined. The fish auction.
10, 32, 10, 33, 10, 34, 10, 35, 10.
Back in the early 80s, the auction took place in a small city-owned building right at the dock called the Wharfinger Building. It was so small that the fish dealers would stand shoulder to shoulder, and the haze of cigarette smoke was thick enough to catch the morning light coming in the windows.
25 and 35.
At the front of the room, there was a railing to hold back the crowd, and behind that, a giant chalkboard divided into columns. It listed the catch from each boat broken down by species. So many pounds of cod, so many pounds of yellowtail flounder, so many pounds of dabs, and so on. But this was not anything like the kind of auction you might expect. It was much, much more confusing. Because instead of going down the list and auctioning off the species one by one, they would auction all the species at once on all the boats at once.
To deal in one of those auctions, you gotta be definitely good with numbers.
And if you want to know how Carlos Rafael really made a name for himself, how he came to dominate this port, it all started here at the auction.
And I have nobody to thank but my godfather. He was my teacher back home, and he banged my head on a blackboard. He says, "I'm gonna get this timetable through your skull." I would be pissed at that age. I said, "This son of a bitch, I hope you die." But today, I got nothing but to thank him for making me that good with numbers.
I mean, he was just like lightning. Bang, 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 bang.
Fisherman Bill Blount used to watch Carlos at the auction.
And I'd tease him once in a while. He'd get mad at me. "Shut up, Billy, shut up." But he was brilliant.
The fish auction began at 8 a.m. sharp, and it ended at 8:22. Exactly 22 minutes to bid on everything you could keep track of. The dabs, the cod, the flounder, all of it.
I could outrun anyone on that auction. I could bid in 8-9 boats at a time by doing the math all in my brain like a computer couldn't even do it that fast.
But the thing that made the auction so confusing and made Carlos so good at it was this final quirk in the rules. Whoever put in the last high bid on any individual species from a given boat got all the species from that boat. So even though you're bidding on the species, you're really bidding on the whole boat via the species. If you're feeling lost, don't sweat it. You don't really need to understand how this auction works. Just know that there is some interesting strategy to it. Like, if Carlos could see the guy next to him really wanted the haddock, but that same boat had a big load of cod, he could screw the guy by bidding up the cod.
He'd make the cod like huge money. He'd make the flounder small.
So now the competition would be forced to outbid Carlos on the cod just to get at that haddock they really wanted. That is, unless the competition gives up, in which case Carlos would be stuck with the overpriced cod, plus the haddock, plus whatever else was on the boat. That was the game.
I mean, it was really cool.
It was fast, it was risky, it was ruthless. It was exactly the kind of business Carlos Rafael excelled at.
You can read his eyes. You know exactly if he's shaking, if he's not shaking, if he's going to drop, if he's not going to drop. When you do it in person, you can tell.
Was it a rush to be on the auction floor?
Oh, yeah. 22 minutes. That was a high to get there. I couldn't wait for the next day to see if I could even get better than the day before.
By the 1980s, when Carlos came on the scene, this whole system had been in place for decades. The fish dealers bought their fish from the boat owners paid their captains and crews, the crews risked their lives to go out and catch the fish. Everything was in a delicate balance, held together in that little brick building owned by the city. But a shock was coming that would upend that balance forever. From GBH News, this is The Big Dig Season 3, Catching the Codfather. I'm Ian Koss. The shock I mentioned would allow Carlos to consolidate power like never before, but it would also leave a mark on the whole port. A feeling of bitterness and mistrust that lingers there to this day between the fishing industry and their government. This is part 2. I hope those people sink. Support for Catching the Codfather comes from Rogers Fish Company, founded by Roger Berkowitz, offering an array of New England seafood and entrees shippable anywhere in the U.S. More at rogersfishco.com. So I was wondering, could you, to start, tell me how long has your family been fishing in New Bedford?
Well, it started with my great-grandfather. He came over on a whale ship from the Azores. And then I started my career when I was 9 years old.
Rodney Avila is a fourth-generation Portuguese-American fisherman. His grandsons fish now, too. So that's 6 generations total, all drawn to the same sea.
Any day I had off at school, I'd go fishing with my grandfather who owned the little lobster boat out of here. So as we grew up, fishing was in our lives. That's what we did.
On the 4th of July, the whole extended family would ride out to one of the islands off New Bedford and pitch tents for the weekend. The women and young kids would hang out on the beach, while the men would take one of their boats out and hunt for supper.
Swordfish, clams, quahogs, scallops. I mean, we did everything.
And growing up in a fishing family here, one of the rites of passage is your first trip to a place known as George's Bank.
George's Bank is one of the richest fishing areas in the world. Federal officials...
George's Bank is a huge expanse of shallow water, extending hundreds of miles out to sea, like an underwater peninsula invisible on the surface. From New Bedford, it takes a whole day for a fishing boat to get to the outer end of the bank, so this is not a quick trip you can make on a day off from school. Usually boats would spend at least a week fishing out there, far from shore, where the weather and currents were notoriously dangerous and unpredictable.
These are the wildest waters in the world. It's called the graveyard of the Atlantic.
But boats have made that trip for centuries because the shallow water and swirling currents make an incredible habitat for fish.
It's one of the few major spawning grounds for haddock and cod in the United States.
And as soon as Rodney Avila was old enough, he made the trip there too. Avila remembers that the day he graduated high school, his mother drove him straight from the school parking lot down to the dock where a boat was waiting for him to take a 7-day trip out to George's Bank. He was a man now, and those fishing grounds were part of his family heritage, just like the Portuguese clubs and the 4th of July cookout. So now just imagine how the port responded when they heard that their government wanted to give it away to Canada.
I can go get a chart if you like.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Jeff Pike was a staff member for the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee in the U.S. House. He worked with Congressman Gary Studs, the man who led the charge in kicking out the foreign fishing boats. But as Pike explained to me, that move had consequences.
So if you had the coastline would be going up this way, right?
Yep.
And you got Nova Scotia here.
2 months after Gerald Ford signed the Magnuson Act, the bill that created the 200-mile exclusive fishing zone, Canada's Secretary of State announced that they were going to do the same thing. The problem is that if you draw a line 200 miles out from the coast of the U.S. and another line 200 miles out from the coast of Canada, those two lines cross.
And the disputed zone was essentially here.
They crossed on George's Bank. In 1977, delegations from the US and Canada met for a series of negotiations on how to settle the disputed zone. On the American side, the delegation was led by the State Department, the people who, as Congressman Studs put it in the last episode, thought lobsters were red.
My involvement was representing the seafood processing industry from the city of New Bedford, which was major, and being a advisor to the State Department.
Harvey Mickelson was there for these negotiations too, and horrified by the outcome. The final compromise was this. The two countries would split George's Bank, and the piece that the State Department was ready to hand over to Canada, it was the richest part of the whole bank. That meant American captains like Avila would lose access to some of their best fishing grounds, areas they had relied on for generations. But there was still hope. The treaty had to be ratified by Congress, and Mickelson knew his congressman very well. It was Gary Studs.
In fact, he called me on the phone and he said, Harvey, what's the story? Do you want to accept the treaty or not? And I said, no.
Mickelson and the other industry reps told Studs, we want to fight. The thinking was that if Congress rejected the treaty, then the dispute would then go to the International Court. And Mickelson believed they had a solid case there. Historically, it was U.S. fishermen who had made the most trips to George's Bank. And just looking at it on an ocean chart, it's clear that the bank is an extension of the U.S. continental shelf. It seemed intuitive to give the whole thing to the U.S.
When he said, okay, and that was it, he handled it.
The Canadian Parliament ratified the treaty, but the U.S. Congress rejected it. The fight was on.
Do you remember on that phone call weighing there's a bit of a gamble here? I mean, it's sort of like choosing whether to go to trial or take a plea deal, right?
Anytime you walk into court, you don't know what you're going to walk out with. We all know that.
In 1981, the dispute went to the International Court in The Hague. For Rodney Avila, life went on as normal. George's Bank was in legal limbo, so everyone could fish there, for now.
Both Coast Guards used to fly over us. We used to see the Canadian cutter, the Shabukto, that was the name of it. He used to pass us all the time, and they'd wave, we'd wave like that.
But down in Washington, Jeff Pike was worried about the case. The U.S. legal team was from the State Department, the people who had opposed creating the 200-mile limit in the first place. And Pike was getting the sense that this fishing dispute was just not that team's top priority.
Whereas Canada was putting everything they had into winning the case.
The Canadian lawyers were all in. They were presenting videos, they had historical documents. It was a good show.
I guess you could say we got out-lawyered.
On October 12, 1984, the ruling finally came down from the International Court in The Hague. And it was bad.
I was in the New Bedford office, and it was in the morning, around 9 o'clock, because as soon as I got the call from State Department, I called Harvey, I called a number of the industry leaders. I got out the chart on Gary's desk in New Bedford, and I said, you got to come here. We got to talk about this.
On a regular map, in which the ocean is just a flat, uniform wash of blue, the so-called Hague Line makes perfect sense. It basically takes the midway point between the U.S. coast in Massachusetts and the Canadian coast in Nova Scotia and follows that all the way out to sea. For the New Bedford fishermen, who knew what was under that expanse of water, the line was unthinkable. The court had not only split George's Bank, but the split was even worse than the original treaty. The U.S. had gambled and lost.
And they were like shocked. It was just betrayal.
Now, the American boats had 14 days to get back on their side of the new line. Then, the invisible barrier became hard. Some fishermen started calling the line the French fence.
What did that loss feel like?
Well, we lost everything. We lost the best yellowtailing. We lost the best scalloping. We lost the best swordfish grounds. I would say we lost a good 40 to 50% of our revenue.
Did you have an emotional connection to that place? You know, is it like a farmer losing their field?
Yeah. Like I said, I started when I was 9 years old. My first trip to George's Banks, I was 13 years old. I mean, I didn't hate a lot of people, but I wasn't happy with our government, really. Only because I figured they just threw the fishing industry away to Canada.
Avila's uncle had warned him about the government getting involved in their business. He said it was like your in-laws coming to visit. Once they came, you'd never get them out. And here was the twist of the knife. The government had kicked out the foreigners only to give up the crown jewel of their fishing grounds.
There was a lot of anger. And I think in hindsight now, you really see how losing that has really impacted the New England industry.
There's a phrase you hear a lot in the conversation about fishing in New England. Too many boats chasing too few fish. In the 70s and early 80s, the government had encouraged fishermen to build new boats, to invest in their industry, to create jobs for their children mining this vast resource that was suddenly all theirs. Like I said before, a whole generation answered that call, including Rodney Avila and Carlos Rafael and many others. But the promise was false, and now the whole industry built on it was about to crack.
From whaling to textiles to fishing, New Bedford has always put all its economic eggs in a single basket, only to see each industry collapse. For other cities, the classic conflict...
In 1984, the year of the Hague ruling, New Bedford was the richest fishing port in the country in terms of the total value of the seafood landed there. Times were good. Then the French fence went up. In the next year, 1985, total landings dropped by 20%.
So when you shrink the pie, when you overfish the resource, it puts everybody under strain.
This is John Bullard, former mayor of New Bedford.
And when you put everyone under strain, the pressure in the pressure cooker builds.
The fuel costs $2,500, the ice $1,000.
To make matters worse, the cost of running a fishing boat, the fuel, the insurance, kept going up.
To do better, they fish harder,
squeezing the pressure cooker even more.
And at some point, it's going to blow.
And it happened to blow on your watch.
Yeah, definitely blew on my watch.
John Bullard was sworn in as the mayor of New Bedford on Monday, January 6th, 1986, at the high school auditorium. This was a little more than a year after the French fence went up.
So, inauguration day is, pomp and circumstance. It's figuring out which family Bible you want to put your hand on. I chose 2.
He chose 2 Bibles because 2 of his ancestors had also been mayor of New Bedford before him. Bullard comes from a legendary local family. His ancestors had built up the whaling industry here back in the 1700s. For centuries, literally centuries, they had been engaged in the life of the city, and they had been known by the name John Bullard. And how many John Bullards are there before you?
Well, my grandfather wrote a letter to the Harvard admissions guy saying there are 13 John Bullards. 11 of them went to Harvard. 1 who didn't was fighting the Revolutionary War, and 1 is my grandson.
Our John Bullard, by the way, did become the 12th John Bullard to attend Harvard. And now he was following through on another family tradition, becoming his city's mayor. As soon as he was inaugurated, Bullard knew exactly where he needed to go.
And I said, well, before we get to the mayor's office, Ed Craig from the police department was going to drive me there. I said, Ed, could you take me down to South Terminal?
Down inside the pressure cooker. Bullard and his 12-year-old son got into the mayor's black Buick with a blue municipal license plate. The police sergeant descended the hill and approached the waterfront. You may have an image of coastal New England as something quaint. colorful little boats tied up at wooden piers, a lobster shack. But the New Bedford waterfront is not that. It's industrial warehouses, it's loading docks, it's concrete and steel. It's a place built to move fish. But in 1986, all of that had come to a halt. The fishermen were on strike. As the mayor's car approached the scene, Bullard could see on one side of the street there were about 200 angry fishermen. On the other side, about 100 police officers with riot shields and German shepherds. The car stopped in the middle. Bullard told his son to stay put, and he stepped out to meet the crowd.
With the best of times, you have one of the most difficult jobs that anyone has.
First, Bullard spoke to the fishermen.
Now, I, as mayor, cannot take sides between union and management, and I don't think you expect me to. We'll take sides between right and wrong. Well,
he could tell the situation was volatile. The men crowded around him, angry that Bullard wasn't taking a stronger stand on his first day in office. Bullard then crossed the street to speak with the police officers and went back to the car where his son was waiting. As they pulled away, someone threw a rock in their direction. It missed, but the message was not lost.
There's no such thing as being in the middle of the street.
Fishing is a kind of tricky business to unionize. A single port like New Bedford could have dozens of different boats with many different owners, each of whom hire and pay their own crews. There is no single employer to bargain with. But the fishermen of New Bedford had managed to band together nonetheless, and to win real concessions from the boat owners.
I was a union man before I was a boat owner.
Rodney Avila had been in that union when he was starting out, and remained a strong union supporter, even after he owned his own boats.
I kept my boats in the union because I thought it was best for the crew, because it gave them a retirement package, and it had some control over the work. On a dragger, it was 8 and 4. You worked 8 hours, you got 4 hours off. On a scalper, it was 6 and 6. You worked 6 and you got 6 off.
According to Avila, the union even limited how many pounds of fish a boat could catch per crew member. 6,000 pounds per person per trip. The point was to protect jobs, but it also functioned as a kind of conservation measure at a time when there were very few limits on what you could catch. By the mid-1980s, only about a third of the boats in the port were officially union boats. But even still, the union was powerful enough that the non-union boats would mostly follow these same guidelines.
If you didn't go by those regulations, you'd lose your crew to union boats.
So as long as there was a critical mass of union boats, it kind of kept the same standards in the whole fleet.
Right. Yes. So it was better working conditions for the crew. It was better pricing for the crew because the price came up. And it was better for the consumer because they get fresh fish. I thought it was the best. I didn't want to see the union break up.
So now we can see all the main players in this particular story. There are really 3 of them. The boat owners, their crews, who are represented by the union, and then the assorted dealers and processors who buy their fish, people like Carlos. So owners, dealers, and crew. We're going to spend the next few minutes focusing on the conflict between the boat owners and the crews, because that's how the strike started. But soon enough, Carlos and the dealers will be dragged into this fight too.
Boat owners and union officials haven't met since contract negotiations broke down last Thursday. Then this weekend, the boat owners decided to take
In the fall of 1985, back when John Bullard was still campaigning for mayor, the boat owners and the fishermen's union were meeting to negotiate a new contract.
There are several issues separating the two sides. The first and foremost is pay, and that's determined by the split of the catch.
Instead of receiving a salary or set rate, each crew member was paid a slice of the value of the catch, which of course was determined at auction. So when the fishing was good and the prices were good, everyone benefited. Under the old contract, The revenue from each trip was split so that the crew got the bigger share.
Back then, we used to get 42% for the boat and 58% of the catch went to the crew.
A 58-42 split, favoring the crew.
And it was the best settlement for the crew.
But with rising expenses and now falling catches thanks to the French fence, the group of owners that negotiated with the union was demanding new terms, an even 50-50 split of the catch.
What do you think of the contract they've offered you, the boat owners have offered you?
I think it's not fair. It's not fair.
Commercial fishing is generally considered the most dangerous job in America, period. Rates of workplace death are 40 times the national average. So even in good times, that kind of pay cut the owners proposed would be a tough sell. In 1985, it was devastating. The fishermen would be getting a smaller slice of a smaller pie.
Leave my family home, wondering what's going to happen to my wife and the kids. To make $200 a week, it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
The final ingredient in the pressure cooker was the union leadership. The union had gone through its own internal struggles that year, and the leader left standing was a controversial figure named Joe Paiva.
Joe Paiva is of Portuguese descent, and he now is the business agent for the Teamsters local in New Bedford.
Paiva was known as a bit of an agitator. Fishermen I've met described him to me as a badass, a hoodlum, and a tough character. In pictures, Paiva usually has a Union jacket and a white newsboy cap pulled down over his face. What you can't see in the pictures is that the 4 letters of his last name are tattooed between the knuckles of his left hand, P-I-V-A. On the day after Christmas, 1985, with contract negotiations stuck, Paiva's union decided to up the pressure. That's when they declared a strike.
It's a proud day. I must let the city know, and we must let management know. We are working people. We create with our hands, we work with our hands, and all we want is a fair shake.
Like I said before, less than half the fleet carried union crews. So if those crews simply walked off the job, it would not shut down the port and force the other side to bend. Fishing could go on. However, there was another way to apply pressure on boat owners, a weak link in the whole supply chain, which is the auction. Shut down the auction, and you shut down the port.
It's a matter of right and wrong. Fairness, that's it.
So a week into the strike, on January 3rd, 600 union members surrounded the small brick Wharfinger Building, marching in a slow loop with picket signs against their shoulders.
Steady in this fight until we win.
2 boats were waiting nearby, tied up at the pier and ready to put their fish up on the blackboard. Now, in theory, the building was still open. The fish dealers could simply cross the picket line and buy fish from any boat willing to sell. But inside the building, they found that the phone lines, which the dealers used to communicate with their own customers, had all been cut, and the clock that counted down the 22 minutes had been disabled. That day, there was no auction.
As the New Bedford fishermen strike gets older, it's not getting any closer to a settlement. In fact, both sides are so far apart.
This situation went on for over a week. The same week, John Bullard was sworn in as the city's new mayor. Negotiations were stalled, and the auction was closed.
In fact, both sides are so far apart, even the mayor of New Bedford is wondering whether anyone wants to settle.
That's a question in my mind, whether both sides are.
It was January, so the union members out on the picket line lit fires in trash cans to stay warm. A local cafe provided free chicken soup and trays of bologna sandwiches. Everyone seemed dug in, ready to wait it out.
The mayor said his city was losing more than $1 million a day worth of business.
So now, what had started as a feud between the union and the boat owners over pay had expanded to include the fish dealers, the people like Carlos Rafael, who made their living cutting deals at the auction. Because every day the auction stayed closed meant another day of no deals, no action. until the last week of January when the stalemate finally broke.
Because this still was America. You know, you ain't gonna stop my operation. You can do whatever you want. I will keep buying fish. Don't even try to stop me.
Harvey Mickelson, the seafood industry lawyer, was at the center of what happened next because his clients were the fish dealers who wanted desperately to restart the auction and get back to buying fish. He recalls the decisive moment came first thing in the morning, right outside the Wharfinger Building.
Somebody pushed one of the buyers from behind. And there had never been anything like that before. Didn't hurt him, but he pushed him.
That day, Mickelson and his clients made a decision.
The buyers were going to take control of the auction.
For decades, the fish dealers like Carlos had been guests at the auction. They could come, they could bid, they could play their games, but they did not run the place. It was the union that officially ran the auction, and it was the city that owned the building. That was about to change.
I was able to get an office, moved all of the telephones, 14 houses of telephones, into that place overnight.
With those newly installed phone lines, plus of course a big blackboard, the dealers had everything they needed to run an auction.
Without any involvement at all from the union or the city.
Mickelson knew this move was dangerous. It was a provocation.
I mean, from everybody's perspective, I can understand that.
And the union would respond to that provocation.
And I'm getting into better position here to see exactly what's going on. The dealers are out. They're out in the lot right now.
I want to introduce you to our sponsor for this season, Rogers Fish Company, because they really have an interesting story of their own. The Roger we're talking about here is Roger Berkowitz, who is truly a legendary Boston fishmonger. Like when Julia Child wanted to buy fish for her TV show, she would go to Rogers Family's Fish Market. And now you can too, because Rogers delivers restaurant-quality flash frozen seafood direct to your door. We'll be sharing more about what they offer as the season goes along, but in case you were wondering who this Roger is, now you know. More at rogersfishco.com.
I mean on the last, half an hour of the globe, half on the northern under, the balance of whatever we have there on the...
The private fish auction opened for business on January 20th, 1986, so almost a month into the strike. The building Mickelson had found was the warehouse for a trucking company called Yellowbird Motor Lines, so people called it the Yellowbird Auction. And it had a very different feel from the old Wharfinger Building. High ceilings, fluorescent lights, fresh carpeting, and a chain-link fence all around the outside.
Half it up. Nice round last one.
As Harvey Mickelson himself put it to me, the fox was now taking over the chicken coop.
This was one more blow to the crew.
Again, John Bullard, the city's new mayor.
So they got even angrier because now they were being screwed twice, first by the boat owners, then by the dealers. And so they surrounded the building.
Joe Paiva and the mass of striking fishermen simply relocated about 3/4 of a mile down the waterfront to the Yellowbird Building and set up a new picket line. But after a month on strike, the crowd was getting restless. There were reports of broken windows and vehicles being lit on fire. Anything could happen now.
See, right here, I got a nice souvenir from that strike.
In his office, along with all the Scarface memorabilia, Carlos Rafael keeps a rock the size of a fist.
This rock was through the T-top of my Firebird doing the strike.
Where were you?
I was going into the auction, and they had a picket line. I got my Firebird. I went to the driveway. They were blocking. I wouldn't stop. I went right through, and I saw the guy that threw the rock I went to him. I said, okay. Which you date, I will not forget. And if you think you're going to scare me with a rock, it'll be the biggest mistake you ever made.
Carlos says that some dealers didn't dare cross the Union, but their loss was his gain. Carlos hired security at his warehouse around the clock. He started carrying a gun. When the tires on his trucks were slashed, he replaced them, and he kept going to the auction. Because for whoever could make it in the door, there was good money to be made.
Every time it's a crisis, that's when you make a lot of money.
We've got riot gear police lined up all down the street here, all the way past the gate. There are several police cars in an L formation.
I can remember leaving my car at one of the members' locations.
Harvey Mickelson told me that as the standoff wore on, groups of buyers started meeting at a separate location and all loading into a delivery van, like the kind with a refrigeration unit and no windows. The van would pull into the enclosed parking lot at Yellowbird and back up to the building as close as possible.
People were across the street, fishermen with wives and dogs and kids throwing rocks.
Once the van was in place, the dealers would kick the rear doors open and sprint the final 15 feet to the safety of the building. The way Mickelson described it sounded like the beach landing at Normandy.
And I'm getting into better position here to see exactly what's going on. The dealers are out. They're out in the lot right now.
But the fish dealers, remember, they thrived on cutthroat action, on bluffing, backstabbing, brinkmanship. That was all part of their business. And so they were not going to back down now.
I come out and says, one of you steps in the front of my truck, I'm going to shoot you. And I mean it. Don't take this as a threat. This is a promise. You block that driveway one more time, one of you is going to go down.
Cars are now flying at a very fast pace out of the lot. More rocks flying, more cars coming out. People are being taken into custody left and right here. The last of the dealers are now out of the lot, hit the pavement pretty fast, and the rocks continue to...
They cleared out of your way?
They knew I meant it. And I got through, and I sold. I was making good money with the fish to the other dealers because some of them were scared to load on the boats. I wasn't scared. This is a free country. You keep doing what you do. When you believe in a strike, you do all that. Do not interfere with my trucks.
Joe Paiva and his union were starting to lose their grip on the port. Non-union boats continued to fish. The private auction continued to sell. Dealers like Carlos continued to profit. But the union did succeed in one thing: drawing the city government into the fray.
You fishermen over the years have been screwed royally.
And that allegiance between the city and the union made sense. New Bedford was historically a Democratic city. The Democrats were historically the party of labor. And especially at that time, when the Reagan administration was actively breaking public unions. Bullard, as the Democratic mayor, always kept his distance from the contract negotiations, but it's clear to me that his sympathy was with the striking fishermen.
What about the strike itself? What can you do for the fishermen?
I think there's very little we can do.
And there was one thing that Bullard could do for the fishermen. One bit of leverage that he still had to at least protect the public auction.
There was a city ordinance that said it had to happen in public so anyone could go down and see that take place.
This ordinance had been on the books for decades. It said that any fish unloaded at city piers had to be sold at the city auction. Simple enough. But the rule had never been controversial before, so it had never really been enforced.
I said, yeah, well, let's find out what's going to happen if we do that. We need to arrest the first captain who tries to auction at Yellowbird.
We'll enforce the ordinances against them.
That first week the so-called Yellowbird auction was open, citations quickly piled up. 4 against fish dealers and 8 against boats.
To get them to act in what we believe is the...
Bullard was no longer in the middle of the street. He was now in the fight.
We'll probably find out in the next few weeks whether the ordinance is legal or not.
But again, it was still unclear to everyone if these penalties would hold up in court.
So I called up the judge who had sworn me in.
On the phone, Bullard explained to the judge about the ordinance and the arrests, the question of its legality and all that. But it turned out no explanation was needed.
Judge Jacobs said, "Thanks for the call, Mayor. I know that ordinance very well because before I was a judge, I was a city solicitor. I actually wrote that ordinance." I said, "No kidding."
For a moment, Bullard's heart lifted. I mean, you'd think the judge would be on the city's side if he had written the rule in question.
"Really? You wrote the ordinance?" He said, "Yes, I wrote that ordinance. And therefore, I know it's unconstitutional because I wrote it."
And with that, his heart dropped.
I said, "Judge, you telling me you wrote an ordinance that you know is unconstitutional?" "Yes, I did. And so I'm going to throw that case out of court faster than you can just blink an eye at."
The law was a hollow threat. It had always been a hollow threat. Now Bullard knew it, and if the fish dealers didn't know it too, they were bound to find out pretty soon. The strike was now into its second full month. Boat owners and crews remained stuck, and so far the only winner was their mutual enemy, the dealers.
Then this weekend, the boat owners came up with a different tact. Instead of talking to the union officials, they decided to make an offer directly to the union membership.
So a week after the Yellowbird auction opened for business, the boat owners delivered an ultimatum. Our boats are going back out to sea. You can work on our terms, or we'll find crew who will. The terms were basically what the owners had been demanding all along, an even split of the catch, 51% to the crew, 49% to the owners. The union under Joe Paiva quickly rejected the offer, but the offer wasn't really directed at him. It was at his members.
I mean this very sincerely. There were some vessels that got out of here, and it made good press. And I watched this press take me on.
This was now the ultimate test of the union's strength, and Paiva knew it. Would his members hold the line?
And I'm going to tell you this. They watched the boats go out, but they never followed the rest of the story up. They went out with 2, 3 men. I will remember my friends, but I'll never forget my enemies, and I will never forgive them.
When I talked to fishermen who were working at this time, I found a lot of them have mixed feelings about the strike. In principle, they supported the union and what it stood for. But in this case, there was some personality and ego involved that hurt the process. I'm thinking specifically about Joe Paiva, the union leader who once said of himself, "Some people think I walk on water, and some people think I should be in the water." Paiva promised his members a lot, maybe more than he could deliver. And when the negotiations went poorly, he didn't shy away from antagonizing the boat owners. And then, of course, there was the violence and destruction of property. It's hard to judge now, and Paiva would sometimes accuse the media of fixating on the violence to make a better story. He'd probably say that about this podcast. But it's clear from my research that this strike did have an aggressive edge that ultimately undermined its support. How did you respond at the time as a boat owner?
Well, as a boat owner, I respected the strike.
One of those conflicted fishermen was Rodney Avila. At first, Avila kept his boat tied up and didn't ask his crew to work. He didn't want to defy the union that he had once been part of and still believed in.
Then I had a leak in my boat, and my son went down and saw a crack. I mean, the harbor was iced up, saw a crack in one of the wells. So I called up Norlantic, which was a shipyard over here, and I asked them, I says, can I bring the boat over do you have welders? So he says, yeah, bring your boat over, I'll get a welder right on it. So I told my son, start the engine up, I'll be right down. When they heard the engine start up, one of the guys says, oh, Rodney's going fishing. They brought everybody down. Well, by the time I got to the boat, must have been at least 50 guys around my boat. And I said, I'm not going fishing. I've got a leak in the lazarette and I'm going to weld it. And one of the guys there said, no, he's going fishing. And then they threatened my son. So I said, you know what? Why am I even into this? So I called up my crew without anybody knowing. I asked them, hey, if I take my boat to Newport, you guys want to come to Newport and fish?
That's Newport, Rhode Island, a nearby port that was not on strike.
Everyone but one said yes. I said, that's fine. So I ended up coming down one night, starting the boat up. Me and my son, we took it to Newport.
As someone who had been in the union, was it hard for you to ultimately cross that picket line and go out fishing?
It was, but it wasn't the same union that I joined. It was different leadership. The benefits were the same, everything was the same, the percentage were the same, but wasn't the same core people inside.
By the time Avila did come back to New Bedford, it was clear that the striking fishermen knew where he'd been.
I had to call 4 new tires. They slashed the tires, broke a mirror, kicked in the door, but it's all right. I mean, they did what they had to do. I did what I had to do.
It started as a trickle of boats leaving the harbor, then 10 all at once, then another 10. One striking fisherman told the local paper, "I hope those people sink." The strike did not formally end, but over several months, the picket lines dwindled, trash can fires stopped burning, the trays of bologna sandwiches stopped coming. The court cases from that hollow city ordinance were all thrown out. By the spring of 1986, when the last patches of ice were gone from the harbor, you could walk the waterfront and never know that technically it was still on strike. To this day, the city-run fish auction has never reopened, and the Fishermen's Union has never recovered. Do you feel like if they had held on, is there a world in which they could have won that strike?
I don't think so. I don't think so. So the boat owners got what they wanted, the dealers got what they wanted, and the crew got screwed.
John Bullard told me that from the time he got into politics in his hometown, he understood that he would have a delicate relationship with the fishing industry, that his world and theirs were not made to mix.
Fishermen are anti-government because fishermen are fiercely independent. That's why they go fishing.
Bullard is a liberal Democrat, someone who fundamentally believes government exists to help people, and specifically those people who can't help themselves. He acted on that belief. He took a side. But in the strike, just like in the border dispute with Canada, when the government tried to help the fishermen, the government failed. It couldn't help them.
As you know, I've been told I do have a short statement here.
In the summer of 1986, so a few months after the strike fizzled, President Ronald Reagan gave a press conference addressing the struggles of American farmers, who, like the fishermen, were facing tough economic times. And he delivered to them one of his favorite mantras.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help. By the end of the 1980s, you can see why many fishermen would fear those words too. After the strike, there were really only 2 power centers left in the port, the boat owners and the fish dealers. And of course, Carlos Rafael was both. Remember, these were the years when the federal government was still offering up big incentives to build new boats. By 1986, Carlos had started to build his own fleet with the trademark CR on the bow. So the strike was a gift. It gave him more control over his boats, more control over the auction, more control over his entire business. Once again, and not for the last time, A crisis for the industry was an opportunity for Carlos.
I mean, there'd be days I'd buy £250,000.
And it was around that same time that he also got a new nickname.
There'd be days would be 12 boats on the boat, I'd buy 10 out of the 12.
One morning, when Carlos had been buying up boat after boat of cod, flounder, and all the other so-called ground fish, someone he knew walked up to him at the auction house and declared,
"We're gonna have to start calling him the Codfather, because I would buy every codfish. I mean, 80% of the ground fish, special codfish, they arrived in New Bedford, I would buy it all." So that's how it started, right in the auction. Call him the Codfather. And the stupid shit stuck.
But the strike was just the first sign of more trouble to come. It had not even attempted to address the underlying issue of falling catches and shrinking stocks, issues that would require collective action, maybe even government action. All through that decade, the warnings kept coming.
Tonight, are the world's oceans running out of fish?
Until 1990, when a group of environmental lawyers took matters into their own hands. That independence the fishermen had cherished, it was over.
It's a doomsday situation if we keep on the way we're going.
That's next time.
Fish disappearing?
Fish disappearing.
Mais portuguesa que jamais ouvi. Tem os seus barcos de pesca que fazem festa ao chegar ao porto.